reflect on what we did on yesterday. One of the things they talked about, one of the first things we talked about was disability categories. I want you to put in the chat box right now what disability category you most often work with. So I want you to put that in the chat box. Okay, if you'll put, and just to emphasize some of the information that they shared, I'm sure that most of you are going to put specific learning disabilities. I don't see the chat at this moment, but I'm sure that that's where we're getting, because 35% of the students in Virginia with a disability are students with a specific learning disability. The next largest category of students is the students with other health impaired, about 20%, speech and language, about 20%, about 13% autism, and about 11% ID and ED students. So those are our largest categories of students. Another question that was asked to you yesterday is, which co-teaching model do you most often use? And most of you, if you'll put that in the chat, I don't see the chat, but I feel strongly that most of you would probably say either stations or one teach, one assist model. So we want you to move away from the one teach, one assist, and we want you to decrease those group sizes by using multiple models of co-teaching. And finally, we talked yesterday about assistive and instructional technology. And one of the things that we want to do is give students access to the general curriculum. And sometimes we can do that through accommodations. But another requirement of IDEA is that we provide specially designed instruction. And we talked a little bit about specially designed instruction. That is the instruction that the teacher does. What is the teacher doing differently for these students? For example, if I'm instructing you in a learning strategy or a vocabulary strategy, then that becomes specially designed instruction. When I co-taught in the science class, one of the things that I did was teach test taking, vocabulary strategy, paraphrasing and summarizing strategies. So that was the specially designed instruction. Could the general ed and special ed teachers both do that? Yes. If the general ed teacher has a strategy, a mnemonic or something that can help me remember, yes, that is available, and they can provide that specially designed instruction in collaboration with a special education teacher. Today, I'm going to talk briefly about the high leverage practices for special education. As you can see from the slide that I have, instruction can be divided into several different layers. And the first layer is more intensive instruction, where I am doing some reading strategy or some work with a student that is more intense, a very intense, rigid program that I have to follow. Explicit instruction goes to a systematic and direct response. For example, if I was teaching students to paraphrase, I might use the RAP strategy. Read, I teach the students read, ask yourself the main idea and put it into your own words. Very specific, these are the steps you take every time you go to summarize a science article. High leverage practices is a bunch of instructional practices that were designed by the Cedar Center and special ed special ed professionals to be able to address the needs of students with disabilities in both the general and the special education classroom. And the Senior Center is a part of the University of Florida. There are, in your folder, I asked you guys last night to look in your folder and download the document High Leverage Practices for Special Education. As you'll notice from that book is available. It's free. I would suggest that you print it off, put it in the back of your teacher planning notebook so that you can refer to it. So it is available. These practices are evidence-based. They have been researched and they work for students with disabilities, but I'm here to tell you that I believe they work for all students. In terms of the high leverage practices, one of them, there are 4 domains within the high leverage practices. And some reason my PowerPoint seems to be off focus, but we can go on anyway. There are 4 domains: collaboration, assessment, social emotional behavior practice, and instruction. There are 22 high leverage practices. In relationship to the collaboration, the one that you guys, if you're working with a co-teacher and the teacher is sharing the classroom toward one primary goal is addressing the needs of the students, or you're doing collaboration. For example, I can collaborate without co-teaching, but I can't co-teach without collaboration. Collaboration is defined in our regs as teachers working together for a common goal, but not necessarily in the classroom. So I could be a collaborating teacher with you, and we talk about the students with disabilities in the classroom, but I don't necessarily have to be there. Co-teaching requires that I spend some or all of the class period in that classroom. So we want to increase the collaboration with professionals to increase student success. We want to be a part of the meetings and the professional meetings with families and other professionals. And then we want to support our families. So collaboration strategies, those are the first 3 HLPs. The second group is assessment. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time because Katie and Chuck are going to talk about assessments a little later, but they encourage us to use multiple sources of information to really get a comprehensive understanding of the student's strengths and needs. Um, in, in relationship to, I just lost my PowerPoint, but hopefully it'll come back. In relationship to interpreting the assessment data. Who's going to interpret it? How do we interpret it? And how do we communicate that? And then finally, using that assessment data to adjust our instructional processes. If we find that there are areas in our curriculum that our students aren't getting, that data should tell us, and we should adjust our instructional process. The next slide is the instruction. There are high-level practices for instruction, and many of them you have seen before. They include writing identifying and prioritizing the long-term learning goals, systematically designing instruction to address goals, adapting the curriculum tasks and materials for specific learning goals, teaching cognitive and metacognitive strategies to support learning and independence, scaffolding that supports, using explicit instruction, using flexible grouping, using strategies to promote active student engagement, using the assistive technologies, and provide intensive instruction. And we need to teach students to maintain and generalize the strategies and instructional approaches to different settings. And then we need to provide positive feedback and constructive feedback. With this, you'll see that there are some videos that go along with showing you how to adapt this instruction. So these high leverage videos are available for our use. And in terms of scaffolds, explicit instruction, and flexible grouping, many of you already do those. Again, the videos are available. One of the things that we did with our co-teaching teams is that we put down all the high leverage practices. We named them, listed them, and then we came up with suggested activities that you could do in your classroom to demonstrate that particular high leverage practice. One of those is the HLP 14, teach cognitive and metacognitive strategies. We sit down and wrote some of the things that we might do in our classroom to promote that particular strategy. Let's talk about in a co-teaching classroom. One of the things we know with co-teaching is that there are six models of co-teaching, and we discussed them yesterday. One teach, one assist. One teacher is directly involved in the instruction, while the other is acting, providing individual assistance. Alternative teaching, one teacher teaches the bulk of the students and another teacher has a small group. One teacher and one observe, one teacher is teaching while the other one is addressing the individual needs of students. When you're in a collaborative classroom, and again, there's station teaching, parallel teaching, and team teaching. But one of the things that as principals, when they're in your classroom, these are the kinds of things that they should be looking for as it relates to the high leverage practices. First of all, we should see that both teachers are actively engaged in the instruction. This is the collaboration high leverage practice. Both teachers' voices are heard. Both teachers are having a role. That you're using inclusive language such as our classroom, our students, we versus my and your. So again, we're looking for those kind of languages in the classroom. The next one is differentiated instruction. Instruction within that, the high leverage practices such as 13, 18, and 19, we're looking at how do we differentiate the content, the process, the product, and or the environment. So how are we addressing the needs? Maybe instead of everybody doing a lab, the product for certain students may be a written project or a research project. How are we doing the process? Are we requiring all students to do all of the particular problems that you have or questions that you provide? How are we changing the environment? Are we requiring all of our students to sit in a seat and look forward? Or are we doing small group and flexible group? Are we differentiating the content? For students with more significant needs, you may have them reading the same content, but it may be an off-grade level book. Again, it is perfectly fine. That's modifying the curriculum for a student with disabilities. And oftentimes we hear that we can't modify the curriculum. If it's in the student's IEP that they have modified curriculum, we have to provide modified curriculum. Are there accommodations evident? Can we see some students using graphic organizers or having a read aloud accommodation? Or are we seeing some of it with pencil grips? Or are we having some small groups and some flexible seating? So those are accommodations that we can provide. And then finally, within this, we want to make sure that the students are actively involved in the learning. So science, I commend our science teachers because oftentimes the first place that we end up recommending a student have access to the science curriculum, it's often the science classrooms. And that's because you guys do an excellent job of getting students actively involved in the instruction. The next thing is the presentations. Are you including multiple forms? Are you using your technology? Are you using whiteboards? Are you using videos? Are you using labs? Are you using word walls? All of those are important for our students. Next, the cultural and climate, the social emotional ones, HLP 7 and 10. Do you have positive behavior supports in place in your classroom? For example, have you taught them what you expect in the classroom, rituals and routines? Every day your homework goes here. every day. This is where we find extra pencils. So if you have those routines, you're creating a positive climate for them. Are the teacher and students interactions, are there evidence that the students are being supported? One of the things that we have to be careful of is that we don't have a student sitting in the back of the classroom, and as long as he's quiet, we ignore him or her. We need to make sure that our students are actively engaged. Also, are we using a variety of instructional groupings? Are our students, are we using flexible groupings, or ability groupings, or homogeneous and heterogeneous groupings, so that it doesn't appear that we're keeping our struggling learners together all the time? Let's change it up and do some flexible grouping. So those are the kind of things that I would be looking for in relationship to the climate within that classroom. The next thing is the assessment. Are we, HLP 4 and 6 talks about ongoing formative assessments. Are we using observation? Are we doing quick checks? Are we using thumbs up? Are we using exit tickets as students are leaving? And most importantly, are you providing feedback? Feedback can be written, feedback can be great job. It doesn't necessarily have to be formalized, but we need to provide ongoing feedback. Okay. In terms of some supports for high leverage practices, one of the things that we have is our TTAC Online. They have a lot of resources for high leverage practices. We also have our Real Co-Teachers of Virginia website, in which our high school teachers demonstrate, our middle and high school teachers demonstrate high leverage practices in their classroom. We also have those same practices for the elementary classroom. Last night, I asked you all to look at Chalk It Up to Experience. Chalk It Up to Experience is a tip from our tips from our Real Co-Teachers. These teachers describe, after 5 years of being part of our co-teaching initiative, how they addressed co-teaching and some of the relationships and activities. Definitely a good read. If you just want to feel good about your teaching practices, please read their stories because they're very inspirational. On the website, there are, on the High Leverage Practice website, there are learning opportunities for teachers on that site. So please don't hesitate to look at some of those practices. If I can get back to my PowerPoint. Okay, so some of those practices are there. I am using my Mac versus my work computer, so it's a little different. So those videos and webinars and those resources are available to you. One of the things what I would like for you guys to do right now is put into the chat any of the high leverage practices that you saw on my list that you use in your classroom. Any of the high leverage practices that you use in your classroom that I have talked about. You'll put any of them. Great. I see lots of them coming in. Most of them are saying you already do it. You already do the positive reinforcement. You've done frame, voice and choice, exit tickets, lab exit tickets. Great. Modified content, modified curriculum, graphic organizers. You do collaboration. And that's the reason these high leverage practices are nothing new to us. We just need to make sure that we are implementing them in a way that they are effective for students with disabilities as well as other students. Remember, it becomes specially designed instruction when you teach me how to use the graphic organizer, when you teach me how to make a foldable, when you teach me how you want me to react when you ask questions, then that practice becomes specially designed instruction. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about high leverage practices? Over the next few months, you will probably see more about high leverage practices in the classroom. This is going to be an upcoming initiative that we will be working from a state level to address getting these practices in the hands of more of our teachers. If you have questions, again, don't hesitate to contact me. Again, it's Teresa Lee at doe.virginia.gov. If you didn't find these resources in your folder, please don't hesitate to email and we will get them to you. Are there any additional questions? No? Great. Thank